Let's look at some more options that we have under data. So selecting the data tab at the top menu, we've got the column stats. So selecting that will provide us the stats on the columns. So the count, the distribution, and this gives us a quick kind of chart of the values that we have within the sheet data. We've got the frequencies, so the values that are most frequently used. So we have 6 being used twice in the selection of that column. We've got the various values that are being used. We've got the total rows, the empty cells. So this is the sheet in general. We've got the value when it's summed, the average, the median, the minimum value, the maximum value. So these are stats and information that you can use to get a quick overview of what's contained. You can also select other rows and ignore certain rows. So we can select rows that we want to ignore from the stats. And we can always go back to 0 if we want to add in and just have 0 rows. We can increment them by 1. So if we want to remove out certain rows, and starting at row number 7, so excluding all the rows from 1 to 6, we could ignore all of the rows before that and only see the stats on those cells and values. We can inspect additional columns by moving to the next column. It will have the column heading here. So in this case, we've got last, and then the next one is going to be code, and the next one is going to be name. So it's going to give us, again, that information, a quick chart, and a distribution. So we've got all of the values, and then for the sheet as a whole. And this is just some information that you could have in a quick glance about your current sheet, and particularly the column contents. There's also the data validation. So what the data validation does is that it will check the cell range. So let's do a data validation on the contents column E and hit OK. The criteria that we want to use. So we want to list from the range a number, and then we want to set it that it's between. We can also do a not between, less than, equal, less than or equal to, greater than, equal to. So there's a number of options there. So we're only going to return back numbers that are between 3 and 10. We can show a warning, or we could just simply reject the input. So we'll just leave it at show a warning. So if the data isn't going to be valid, and this is the valid data within the criteria, we can also show the validation help text. So let's do that. And this is what the criteria is in a summary sentence. So this is good for if you do want others to be able to see the criteria that you're using, then you can show the validation help text. So let's go ahead and we're going to save this validation. And now when we go over that selected range, we can see that this is invalid because the input must be between 3 and 10. So this is how you can have various criteria that should be met within these values. If you want to remove it, you can select the range, and under the data, select the data validation. That will pop up the same range and the number and the criteria, and we can just simply remove the validation from there, and that's going to remove the validation part. So this is a helpful way of making sure and ensuring the data is going to be within the valid data that you're expecting within that content. There's also a data cleanup. So there's cleanup suggestions, there's removing of duplicates, and there's trimming of white space. We enable the suggestion pop-ups. So if there are cleanup suggestions that come up when we're adding in data, it will provide that and provide those cleanup suggestions. And this is just a smart option that you have when you are working with your data. Within the data cleanup, so in this case, we do have 2 rows that have the same values. So let's select that and do the data cleanup, and we're going to remove the duplicates. So this is the rows and columns that were selected. So if we want to select a specific range, we can select a specific column that we want to analyze. So in this case, we want to analyze just column E for duplicates. And it found the one duplicate. So then it's found and removed the duplicate. So 10 unique rows remain. So it removed the duplicate value where we had 6, and it just removed out that value. So it removed out even the other columns because they weren't duplicate, when we're selecting the particular column where we want to remove out the duplicates, it will remove out duplicates to the selected column and then reflect that across all of the data rows. Also, under the data cleanup, we have the trim white space option. We can select the content, and this is in case we have some extra white space. And I'll just add in some white space. We'll select all of the content, and then under the data cleanup, trim the white space. So it found the two cells that I just added the white space, and it's trimmed the white space from these cells. So now when I click them, there's no more white space in front or afterwards. It's kept the white space in the middle. So even if we have multiple white spaces, we do the data cleanup, trim the white space, it will remove out the multiple spaces that I had within the text and clean it up so that there's only the one space. So if you have multiple white spaces or spaces afterwards the text or before the text, it will clean up that content in the cell. We're also able to split text to columns. So let's select that options, and selecting the column that we want to apply this to. So we can select the separator, and right now it's detecting it automatically. So what it did is it automatically detected the space as the separator, and it ended up separating out the first name and the last name into separate columns. So this is a nice way that you can have data that gets separated out. If you want to separate out the data, as long as you have a good pattern within the data, it should automatically be able to detect it. You can also look for specific splitters such as a comma, semicolon, period, space, or you can use a custom splitter and specify what you want to split it by. So in this case, if I wanted to split it by certain characters, that will allow me to split it with those characters. And what it does is when it does split the content, it will actually remove out the characters. So it's removed out the RE and split that content into a separate column. And then once you press enter, it will complete the split of that content. So those are some more options that you have under the data tab.